Today, I'm going to talk to you about a study we have conducted within the research we have done as a part of my PhD thesis. And it deals with one conceptual framework developed by Bachmann that is called assessment use argument. And I'm going to start by telling you why we decided to do that, and then cover just a few theoretical concepts there, and talk about the comparison between our studies and some previous studies conducted worldwide. So to begin with, why actually we have decided? Well, because due to online advancements and technology developments, online tests are becoming more and more frequent because of their numerous advantages, and their administration is actually becoming indispensable in online classes. And when I began administering online ESP tests, because I was teaching business English at one school, I wanted to determine whether they were actually valid, because a significant amount of research has been published analyzing online tests and comparing them with paper-based tests. But the field of analyzing the validity of online assessment through some kind of a systematic and methodological approach actually remains still fairly unexplored. And in the Croatian context, to our knowledge, there are no extensive studies focusing on this area. And therefore, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide some empirical evidence in this area. And that's why the main aim of our study was to analyze the validity of online assessment using this conceptual framework. Although the mode of test administration can be different, all tests have to follow certain development stages, from planning, writing tests, test items, trialing, validation, and then later post-editing activities. And because every test then has to undergo the process of validation, this means that validity is one of the key qualities of any test. And even though it is seen by some researchers as a unitary concept, which is also our standpoint, or as comprising of different types, it is never complete. And that's what's the most important thing here, but rather at a certain degree at which all the gathered data supports the intended interpretations of test results. And during the process of validation, it is not enough to claim that a certain assessment is valid, but these claims have to be supported by the corresponding warrants with their backing, and all the possible rebuttals have to be rejected as much as possible using empirical evidence, much like in the courtroom during the trial, actually. And this conceptual framework that allows for such a validation is the assessment use argument developed by Bachmann, and which was based on Keynes' interpretative argument and Tolman's argument structure. And according to Keynes' argument, Bachmann stated that there are certain links between the test taker's performance in the test and their results, and then finally decisions that are based on them. The first one being evaluation, which is actually the inference based on the observations of the test taker's performance. The second one is generalization, which is the inference based on the assumption that the observed score can be replicated in other similar tasks. The third one being extrapolation, which is inference that the abilities that test takers should use in the test, along with the tasks themselves, are equivalent to the target language used outside of this testing environment. And finally, there is utilization, which are the decisions based on the target score. Moving on, we can see here Tolman's argument structure that is the foundation of the assessment use argument. And according to it, a claim can only be made based on certain data, which is then supported by warrants with their backing, of course, and potential rebuttals or counterclaims, which may actually indicate sources of invalidity, can either be supported, weakened, or rejected by rebuttal data. And the more rebuttals are rejected, the higher the degree of validity of assessment is. Bachmann further developed his assessment use argument and divided it into two parts. The assessment validity argument down here, and the assessment utilization argument. The first one linking the test takers' performance with the interpretation of their results. And the second one links these interpretations that are based on their performance with the possible decisions that are based on them. Using this framework, certain claims can be made during the process of validation. The first one is that assessment records or scores or maybe verbal reports in the assessment are consistent across different aspects of the assessment procedure and across different groups of testers. And as we move on, we can claim different things. The second one being that interpretations about the ability to be assessed are meaningful, impartial, generalizable, relevant, and sufficient. We can go into detail later in Q&A if you want. But let's move on with the third claim that actually is that decisions that are made on the basis of the interpretations take into consideration current values, regulations of a certain school, or even the community as a whole. And finally, the use of the assessment and these decisions have benefits to all the stakeholders in the assessment procedure, from the test developers through the test takers, teachers, and even up to the schools or communities in a wider context. And some previous research that has been conducted using argument use assessment are the following. The first one was conducted by Lossa in 2008. And they actually wanted to assess the quality of teacher judgments in the context of standards-based classroom assessment of English proficiency. So the claim that a certain student has mastered the California English language development standards at her level is based on the data. And the data was her performance in this test, on this assessment. And the warrant that justifies this inference is that the LED classroom assessment actually measures the three aspects of English proficiency. And in their case, it was listening and speaking, reading, and writing, as defined by these standards. And then the rebuttals that were taken into consideration that could weaken the validity of these intended inferences were that teachers did not apply the scoring criteria consistently, and the teachers did not interpret those standards consistently, but they were rejected. And in summary, the evidence gathered as backing for the warrants and the rebuttals was almost to a certain extent proven. There was a slight weakening of one rebuttal, so then this claim at the top was able to be made to a certain degree, but not fully. The second research we have singled out is by Long and their colleagues 10 years later, who also used assessment use argument framework to examine evidence to support claims made about the intended interpretations and uses of scores based on the new web-based Spanish language placement test at a large Midwestern university, public university. So they wanted to see whether the scores obtained in this test were a valid indicator that the students could be placed in a certain language group according to their level of language. They have found that the web-based test was reliable and valid in terms of content, and then the placement decisions being made based on these test scores could have been made. And finally, fairly recently in China, one research explored the predictive ability of the Duolingo mock test, actually, Duolingo English test for Chinese students at college level. And first, they conducted some quantitative analysis, which demonstrated that mock scores were significantly correlated with TOEFL or IELTS results, but given that these scores were significantly lower than they expected, the consequential validity needed further analysis, and that's why they applied the assessment use argument for the qualitative analysis. And in conclusion, this study advocated for the use of the Duolingo English mock test by Chinese college level students for assessing English language proficiency and promoting English learning, but the mock test may still need some modifications to meet the needs of Chinese EFL students. And finally, now let's see what we have done in our study. We have conducted it together with 122 students of economics and 2 assessors or scorers. And the instruments we applied were the online English for specific purposes test, or business English, and its paper-based equivalent. It comprised 3 parts: the reading comprehension, vocabulary comprehension and use, and writing. And we also gave the participants 4 questionnaires on their attitudes towards computers, exams in general, and online business English tests, as well as their test anxiety. And these instruments were then used in the quantitative data, which served as warrants and the backing, as well as possible rebuttals, to be employed in the qualitative analysis using the assessment use argument, which then has yielded in the following. So we were able to claim that the test takers' result in this business English test were consistent based on their performance in this online business English test. And further, we were able to claim the following, that this online ESP or business English test was a valid indicator of their language skills in those domains. If you remember, it was the reading comprehension, the vocabulary comprehension and use, and writing. And that this inference was meaningful, impartial, generalizable, relevant, and sufficient. And throughout this process of validation, we gathered 14 pieces of warrants and possible rebuttals. Thank you. So let's see some of these warrants and rebuttals. I'm not going to show you all of them, but some that were really, really interesting for us. So the first claim, like I said, was able to be made because the data that we have analyzed has shown us the following. So the test was administered according to the prescribed procedures by the school. The test was scored objectively because the closed questions were scored by Google Forms and the open-ended questions by the scorers who had excellent correspondence between their 2 assessments. And that the test takers' results were consistent in the 2 modes of administration, both online and paper-based, because there was positive correlation in all 3 parts of the test. And the second claim was able to be made because the construct that was assessed was clear. The test corresponded to the target language used. The test specifications were clear. The test takers' attitudes did not have any effect on their performance according to the analysis of the data. And also their test anxiety levels did not have any effect on their performance, except in the reading comprehension part, where we found that those test takers with lower test anxiety levels achieved better results in this part of the test. So actually this rebuttal then was in part supported by this data, which weakened our claim. So we were able to say that this business English test is valid, but only to a fairly high degree. If you remember, we believe that there is no full validity, but only to a certain level. And we think that these results show that this test that was administered has a fairly high level of validity. So to conclude, yes, the test takers' results achieved must be valid indicators of the language skill being tested, or if we generalize it to other areas, all kinds of tests should also follow this logic. And this was the first systematic research of validity in Croatia using the assessment use argument, and it contributed to Croatian terminology, which was non-existent in some parts of this area, but it also placed this research in the global context of validity analyses and compare them with some of the studies, three of which I've shown you just now. But the biggest value, I think, and you can share with me if you have any experiences reading or researching something using the assessment use argument, is that all test users who need to validate any applied instrument can use such an approach throughout the educational institutions from the formative low stakes test up to medium stakes and even high stakes test. So thank you very much. And like I said, if you have any comments or questions, I'll be happy to hear them. Or if you have some of your own findings to share. Thank you.
Okay, so we have just about 3 minutes for questions. You can either put it in the chat or raise a hand. Any questions from the people on Zoom?
Entering. Someone is joining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, just really quickly, Bojan, if you could just tell us, if we could leave with one piece from your presentation, what would be that one takeaway that you want us to go away with?
Well, in my opinion, I think this new approach to actually seeing validity as never being complete, but up to a certain degree, and the more evidence we collect to show and prove that it can be at a higher level, the better. Of course, we have to then analyze it from both angles, from the warrants and the possible counterclaims. Really, like in the courtroom, where we have to see the evidence and then the possible counter evidence there. And of course, the more stakeholders are involved in this validation process, the better, because that's what brings the most value to the validation process, when all the stakeholders are included. Like I said, from the authors of the test designers, then there are teachers, there are test takers, then there is the school, and maybe even some other institutions who will benefit from these results, but also who make decisions based on those results, such as admissions offices at universities, immigration, also when language tests have to be taken by the candidates, etc.
Okay,